welcome back to Beyond the Veil Tarot and Astrology. My name is Candice Marie. Thanks for joining me. This is kind of like a part 2 to the full moon in Leo, but we're going to be focusing more on the Sun square Uranus aspect today. I know I talked a lot about the fixed T-square, but I really want to focus more on what's going on with the Sun in Uranus, especially considering the fact that Uranus just entered into a new degree. So now it's at 15 degrees. And this square is going to be exact at 15 degrees. So that's gonna be something we're gonna feel. So this will actually be leading up to the full moon in Leo. But I'm really gonna talk to you guys more about this square. So you're gonna be feeling this probably as early as the 1st of February. It can be in play a couple days before, a couple days after, especially if you're more sensitive to transits. But the exact square between the Sun and Uranus at 15 degrees will take place on February 3rd, 2023. Now, you guys, I'm sure by this point you're well aware that Aquarius season is quite active because we have so many planets moving through Aquarius, which will bounce off the nodes, which creates fateful events. It will square Uranus, which is about, especially in the closing square, this is the 3/4 square, wrapping things up that we have actually been working towards since the Sun-Uranus conjunction last took place in the spring, at least here in the Northern Hemisphere in Taurus. So I want to take you guys through that cycle. I want to talk about why this is such an important kind of phase that's kind of setting up, and where it's breaking down and dismantling things that may seem a little complicated, seems a little complex. So let's start off first with the Sun's placement. So, you know, we talked about the full moon in Leo. That was more so talking about how the moon was shining a light and illuminating really what was going on with the Sun, right? So we were seeing that the Sun was just kind of weird and wacky in Aquarius, needs to march to the beat of its own drum, and it was in friction with Uranus. So I talked about how there was going to be some breakdown. In some cases, it's like where goals trump our physical reality, where we start also thinking more about how we can actually help the collective through kind of shining our own light. So that was the moon's perspective. But now when we look at the Sun and aspects going on with the Sun is more conscious, action-oriented, driven. This is also going to be more obvious because the Sun deals with what is kind of visible and what's seen, versus the moon, which is like kind of out of the blue and we didn't see that stuff coming, more subconscious. So this is why I think the full moon is going to be extra potent, but I also feel like having this exact square happening just after Uranus changed degrees is also significant as well. Now, what happens when we see the Sun square Uranus? Well, the Sun can be about ego. It can be about our joy, our creativity, where we're shining a light. Look at where Aquarius is in your chart. It's shining a light on that area of your life. And the Sun is technically in its fall in the sign of Aquarius. Traditionally, we see Aquarius associated, the Sun associated with Leo. But when the Sun is sitting in Aquarius, it's kind of like, it has a much more difficult time expressing traditional Sun traits. What I like about this is that we are getting ready to see Saturn's gift. The Sun is actually approaching the conjunction to Saturn, so we might see some definitive moments in regards to the final outcome of the Saturn in Aquarius transit over these last 2.5 years. I also see this as a moment of really reevaluating what we're willing to sacrifice, what we're willing to do in order to achieve our dreams. Saturn's only going to be in Aquarius just for a few short more weeks before it moves into Pisces. At 15 degrees, it's definitely about communication, the mind. It can be about technology, documents, communication. I think a lot of the Sun square Uranus is going to be about freedom of communication, freedom of sharing of ideas, and also groups. So I have my eye on like the big social media club, Facebook. Obviously, Facebook and Instagram are kind of the same now. Twitter. Anything in regards to any of the social media or messaging platforms, and what's going to be changing here in regards to freedom of speech, right? Or their lack of, and potentially like regulation. Gemini also deals with doubles, so I'm wondering, like, is this going to bring up some stuff in regards to some really prominent two-person teams out in the world? In the back of my mind, I'm like, is this going to be affecting Gemini? Maybe like that crypto platform. And also just anything in regards to like documents or like maybe even like mandates. So that might be something else that's kind of coming up. I'm going to give you guys some examples of how this square has played out in recent years. Now, we've also got the fact that the sun is in Aquarius, which is a sign that's associated with Uranus. So this makes the Uranus square a little bit more extra potent because we have the sun not totally comfortable in Aquarius, and we have Uranus and Taurus obviously not very comfortable in that sign either. Now, where the sun is more about ego and creativity and kind of, you know, going your own way in Aquarius, Uranus and Taurus is about the destabilization, potential decentralization. It also talks about frequencies and fluctuations that are going on with the earth, with the banking system. And so I'm wondering if there's going to be news or information that's coming out in regards to these topics. I would assume so. In the past, when we see hard-angled squares going on with Uranus, especially in the sign of Aquarius, it has played out as those who are in political kind of arenas having some sense of control or limit or wielding their power against Taurus-related things. So our bodies, our banks, our financial freedom, right? Uranus and Taurus. It can even be about food. We've definitely seen through the Saturn-Uranus square supply shortages and issues in regards to, you know, more kind of Taurian people who are standing up. So this can be new innovations in crypto and banking. It can also be that this is connected to farmers and people who work with the land. So there can be a little bit of them kind of laying down the iron fist and saying, hey, we're going to limit something, right? Why? Because Saturn's in this sign. So if we take some past looks, I want to take you guys through these past looks just to give you some ideas, and then we can kind of better speculate what's going to be coming in the future. I want to first take you guys to 2020, and then we'll work our way up to now, because this is when we've had our more recent transits. So let's go to 2020. And these are just a few examples, but the Sun-Uranus square is always going to be something unexpected, and it's about something that can represent like a bit of a clash. All right, so we're going to go to January 22nd, 2020. There we go. And I should also say that throughout these transits, for the most part, we didn't have this in 2020, although Saturn was coming into Aquarius. We've had really strong presence with Aquarian energies these last few years. So it's not just been the Sun square Uranus, Saturn has been there, we had Jupiter there, whatever. Okay, so let's go back to January 22nd, 2020. As many of you guys know, this is right when Brexit was starting. So like, you know, the EU was going through that whole thing. They were, you know, basically kind of excusing themselves and going through the process of like moving out of some of those agreements. And Brexit was taking place right before we were seeing Wuhan shut down, and then we were going into the beginning of the pandemic in March. So this is a perfect example. The sun, which can represent governing bodies, coming into a square with Uranus, which is saying we are physically going to be separating. A lot of that might have been for financial reasons. We don't know. I can only speculate, especially considering the fact that these were squaring at 2 degrees. But that's about, you know, moving in or out of a physical kind of arrangement or agreement. It can also involve multiple lands because we've got Uranus in the sign of Taurus. So that's one interesting way that the Sun-Uranus square played out. Obviously, we know all the other things that took place at the end of February going into March, but I really want to keep this more about where there was some breaking off or separating, because sometimes we see that with aspects between Saturn-based signs. Obviously, the sun is in a Saturn-based sign, and a square to Uranus. So that's one example. A second example would be January 25th, 2021, a year later. I should note we only see this transit once a year when the sun has been going through the sign of Aquarius. Okay, so this was the 25th. And on the 25th of January 2021, the square was actually taking place at 6 degrees. So first, in 2020, we had it at 2 degrees. Now the Sun square Uranus took place at 6 degrees. Might have been a little different because we had a Sun-Saturn conjunction that was also kind of in the mix, right? We had a 2-degree conjunction between Saturn and the Sun. And right on the other side, we had Jupiter. Okay. So Sun squares Uranus at a 6, which is really highlighting the themes of like health and healthcare and the service industry. Obviously, at this point, we had been in the pandemic for a year. And I remember all these planets going through Aquarius. And at least my unique experience was looking around a year later and being like, we're not going back to normal. We have to kind of like get used to doing things in this more Aquarian, abstract, futuristic way. But on January 25th, or roundabout this transit taking place, I'm sure you guys remember the share trading app Robinhood, right? The one that was favored by Reddit. Yeah, well, they suspended trades amid a huge surge in share price that was of the previously shortlisted stock, GameStop. Okay, so you guys remember that? Everything that was going on in Wall Street, they were kind of shutting that down. There was like this squeeze that was going on, and they kind of stepped in and they were like, nope, we're not going to let, transactions be happening. So that's a really good example of where bigger companies or tech companies or those in control or those who are managing things are not allowing growth when it comes to Uranus in Taurus. It just so happened at the same time we saw Mars there as well. So there was going to be some snap situation where something could have suddenly rose, Mars, Uranus, and Taurus, especially digital crypto, like money, that could have been going on as well. But in this case, I think it was just a sudden chance opportunity to be able to make money, Mars, Uranus. And I think they shut it down. Obviously, they shut it down. They'll claim otherwise, but I think that also went hand in hand with also like, malfunction. I could be wrong, but I think there was some kind of like malfunction or claiming that there was issues going on with the platform. So that's a good example of that. And then if we move to the most recent year in 2022, we had the same Sun square Uranus. This was at the end of the month. Oops, there we go. This was at the end of the month. And it was right around the 30th and the 31st of 2022. This was basically one of the first times, according to my notes, that Austria was the very first country in the EU to mandate vaccines, just days after the square. So we had already had vaccines that were already in the mix until 2021. And then right after this Sun square Uranus that actually took place at 10 degrees, let's go back a couple hours here. There we go. Austria was the very first country in Europe to come out and mandate vaccines. So I'm not making it a vaccine debate. I'm just speculating. It's very fascinating to me that the Sun at a 10, which is about, government control and regulation and anything in regards to like pushing something, was in a square to Uranus. And Uranus in Taurus is about updates and things going on with changes with the Earth or the element of Earth or our bodies. So this is really wielding power, not just in a physical way in regards to resources or even food, but that was definitely something that kind of sparked this conversation in 2022 in regards to whether or not it's being mandated. So interesting. Just a few examples. Obviously, we had different astrology going on each time, so there can be other contributing factors. I think one of which, especially in regards to this in 2022, was the fact that we were also getting ready to, we were in the midst of a Mercury retrograde in Capricorn, conjunct Pluto. So it was a lot about power and control and how they're controlling, potentially like financial systems. But we were also getting ready to start seeing the Mars and the Venus and the Pluto conjunction setting up as well. Call me what's the word that I'm looking for? I don't like the term conspiracy theorist, but call me a conspiracy theorist, sure, whatever. But the more that I look at some of the aspects that have been playing out between the squares, some people say, okay, it's been a war on our freedom. It's been a war on our banking system. It's been a war on our financial securities, on our ability to participate socially. I think that every single time I've seen the Saturn-Uranus square, there's some really significant aspects that are taking place either within Capricorn or within Taurus. So it's got to come down to limitations of goods and resources or control and power, right? So all along, I've been watching this kind of wondering like, what was the purpose? What was the purpose for what's happened these last few years? Okay, let me show you. So now we look at the transits that are going on now. Obviously, this is just me speculating, and I'm going to get some slack from this, but whatever. It is what it is. And then bring you guys to the 3rd when we have this next square. I don't feel like you're going to see something happen on this day. I really want to drive that point home. I feel like this is the beginning of starting to see the rumbles of what will happen, obviously, when the Sun comes into conjunction with Saturn, because maybe that's when we're really going to start to see the effects of what's actually being limited. But just days before the full moon, we see as this square is setting up, the moon in Cancer comes into an opposition with Mercury and Pluto. Okay, so there's going to be themes revolving around emotional security, emotional well-being, and whether or not we're feeling like that's threatened, okay? So that can be like what's going on in the world, if we feel safe and secure in our homes, if we're feeling safe and secure in our home countries. There can be some sense of emotional manipulation and playing off of that out in the world, especially within government or kind of like political figures. But I think that the moon coming into opposition with Mercury and Pluto is kind of suggesting that there's some news coming out that's like, well, there's this thing that could happen and we need to like protect our country, or we need to protect our allies, which I think is going to be the precursor for some of the drama that's going to be coming up with the full moon. But that'll be the trigger point, okay? And when we have the Sun square Uranus, especially when it's in a 3/4 square, right? So we had the seeding in the spring of 2022 when the Sun conjunct Uranus. We then had the opening square when we had the Sun move through move through Leo. I'm sure you guys remember August, right? End of July, August of 2022. This was when Mars and the North Node and Uranus were conjunct. So those opening squares were quite dynamic, especially right around the full moon in Aquarius. Then we moved into eclipse season that we had in the fall, and that gave us a solar eclipse in Scorpio and a lunar eclipse in Taurus, which, if I remember correctly, was pretty close to Uranus. And so this would then be that 3/4 square, right? Really similar to like the lunar cycles, the new moon seeds, the full moon. The opening square is basically the crisis in action. The full moon is going to be like a completion. And then the 3/4 square is the breakdown. So we're like dismantling in a way. So what does it mean, right? What you're going to see is over the next couple of weeks, as this full moon fully unravels, and then we see Mercury come into Aquarius and touch Saturn at 29 degrees, and then we see Pluto come into Aquarius. I'm going to speculate that this is basically certain governing groups are going to come out and say that they're dismantling the financial system, which we already know that this is coming. We're hearing stuff in terms of like, I was listening to a podcaster the other day that was like saying that he lives in the UK and he was out like looking at jobs and stuff and saw that they were literally posting online that they're looking for people to come and fill positions to be working within Europe for the central banking departments. Okay, so this is like a real thing. So in my mind, it's kind of mind-blowing that we hear that they're going through the process of like test or trial running this over these last few months. Suddenly they're hiring for positions. So I want everybody to hear me on this. You're going to hear some stuff coming out, especially just post this square that's like, yeah, well, this is kind of breaking down, so we're focusing on where we're going with the future. Technology is Aquarius. The internet is Aquarius. Groups and masses of people is Aquarius, but also like unity and unification. So I'm also hearing like this echo chamber the more that I'm watching prime ministers and other leaders in other parts of the world basically jumping in and saying, well, yeah, we have to be sending resources to Ukraine. We have to send money. We have to send anything in regards to be able to fuel this war. Keep in mind, nuclear situations is both going to be a connection to Pluto and Uranus. Okay, so you will see later in the spring, Jupiter is going to come into Taurus. It's going to square Pluto. Okay, we are also going to be seeing a Mercury-Pluto conjunction setting up, and we're seeing the Sun square Uranus. So once again, call me a conspiracy theorist, but I'm looking at this going like, of course there'd be a time to like really kind of pump up like the warmongering and scare people into being like, well, this potential war is coming and we have to like release all of these assets and we need to be supporting our allies in the war. And it will all ultimately, I think, be an explanation as to why there is complete financial devastation in spring. Okay, just my hot takes on this. If we look back in time, the last several cycles, let's just go back to when the Sun-Uranus conjunction happened in 2022. So this is when the awareness, the ideas maybe it was the action, maybe it was the seeds that were being planted, for sure is the seeds that were being planted in regards to some of the things that are going to be coming in the spring and really for the next couple years. Okay, Jupiter will hit this degree. Jupiter is going to move up to about 15 degrees of Taurus later this year. So here's that seeded moment. This is back in May of 2022, May 4th, right? Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. May the Force be with all of us with some of this stuff that's going on. So the conjunction happened at 14 degrees. So think back. What new innovative things, right, physically were you looking at back in May of 2022? Were you diversifying your portfolio? Were you learning how to garden? Were you getting into cryptocurrencies? Were you seeing lots of financial fluctuation, right? What was going on then? Obviously at the time, because the sun was in Taurus, Venus was the ruler, okay? So if you guys stay with me here, Venus had just moved into Aries, and Venus is not comfortable there. Venus is also 12th house to the sun. So it's basically saying like, there was already some either relationship or financial disharmony and things that were brewing, right around this time. All right, so then that was the conjunction at a Taurus degree, mind you, okay, it was at 14, so it definitely did deal with innovations in food, innovations in money, innovations in physical changes, but also technology and bodies. Okay, there's no doubt there is an incentive for, I think, a transhuman movement. There is no doubt that there are people in the world that see the potential to start integrating technology with humans for some not so positive reasons, right? They're going to tell you, oh, it's really easy just to wave your hand and you're going to pay for something. Oh, just get all your information, you know, on this chip or on this new ID, and it's gonna be convenient. That's how they're going to sell you with this stuff. So these things were being seeded basically back in the spring. So then we get to the opening square, and this is when the sun moves to square, and this has to be in the sign of Leo. And we could go based off the degree if you want to do that. Certainly when it was squaring by that 14 degree standard, and you really can't make this stuff up, as the sun was coming into 14 degrees, the moon was moving through Scorpio. So you may also want to reference back and go to right around August 6th, 2022, right after the Mars North Node Uranus conjunction. Now, if we want to look at the exact sun square Uranus, that was here on August 10th. Okay. I don't remember specifically. Somebody's going to have to let me know. So I'm sure something happened because 18 degrees is a rather difficult degree in astrology. So I don't remember what happened right around this time, but it had to be something. So this is where we have the sun square Uranus, and this is the opening square. So new things were seeded in the spring. Here we come to the beginning of August, and then it's like there's some kind of tension and there's some kind of friction. Thankfully, we have the sun in its ruling sign. But this still does seem to kind of represent there's some kind of crisis that's kind of opening up that we need to deal with. Okay. At the time, we're just getting ready to come into a full moon in Aquarius. You might want to think back to that full moon at the beginning of August of 2022. And when this happens, look at this, Moon conjunct Pluto in opposition to Venus. So it's this reoccurring theme of people in charge doing everything possible to scare us into not feeling safe and pushing us to financial extremes, pushing us to emotional extremes. And in a way, it almost seems as if they're doing this to like really kind of, dare I say, like crash the system. That's just the vibe that I'm getting. So they're getting people to the point where it's becoming increasingly harder to respond and or deal with some of these impending financial issues. Now, days later, the sun starts coming into an opposition with Saturn, and we have this full moon in Aquarius. So look at that full moon, because I remember that one. That one was not an easy one. Looks like it was at 19 degrees. Still squaring Uranus. So yeah, literally look at the first like 10 days of August and reflect on what was kind of opening up there. We had a grand fixed cross, right? Boom, 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 boom. And when we have those crosses, people don't want to change. They don't want to let things go. They don't want to break things apart. Which leads us then to the fall, when we got into eclipse season. So we're looking at the Sun-Uranus transit, and how can we forget, right? Because we had a lunar eclipse in Taurus conjunct Uranus right here on November 8th. Midterm elections, you guys remember that here in the States, how much of a mess that was, right? So, generally, obviously, lunar eclipses, really emotional. It's about closing out patterns and cycles. We have an exalted moon in Taurus, which is lovely. However, it was conjunct Uranus, where it's like the floor kind of bottomed out, and it was in opposition to its ruler, which was in detriment, square Saturn. So I guess the writing was already kind of on the wall. Like, we've known for some time that, as a result of just 2 or 3 years of just hard economic times and stimmies and everything else that's kind of gone on, eventually this was going to catch up, right? So you want to take a look at what was being highlighted as early as November in terms of what difficult limitations, cutbacks, setbacks were going to be happening now. Right now. So I think that the financial institutions kind of knew what was coming. I think also there was probably talk about where there was going to be a sense of trying to improvise and making some changes to taxes. Something else, I think a lot of people are going to be really surprised. When you're going to go into your taxes this year, you're going to have to answer certain questions in regards to whether or not you have like crypto assets or digital assets. You're going to have to answer these questions. What does it mean? I don't know. I mean, obviously they're probably going to want to try to take account for, who's invested in what and what you have, whether or not that is setting the stage down the road for regulation, which probably isn't a bad thing, but, taxes and other ways that they're going to be able to kind of finagle the system. So here we are now, coming into this final square. And this is going to be the dismantling, the breakdown. Now, even if it's not playing out financially for you, you will see this play out financially in the world. And the sun in Aquarius is abstract. It's other people, it's groups. The Uranus in Taurus is banks and bonds and your pocketbooks, basically. And this is physical changes in regards to resources. So as the sun is coming into the square here, it's basically like maybe this is when the news is coming out that's like, no, this is really the only solution that we have for where things are going. We're then going to see the sun come into a conjunction with Saturn, which I think is another day to watch. I know I keep hammering these dates, but you guys just trust me on this. Right around February 15th, that we're going to be finding out that there's going to be new limitations on individuals, right? The sun rules Leo. On children, there's new limitations in regards to artists, creatives, perhaps even gambling, perhaps even traveling, having fun. I mean, those who are self-employed. That conjunction happens every year. So I'm not saying it's just limited to this, but it's going to be a little bit more prominent coming into the late degrees of Aquarius. And what you're going to hear is, we have to make these changes, Sun, Saturn. It is our responsibility, right? And so you hear stuff like, you know, there's talk about whether or not people are going to be passing legislation to move retirement accounts into safe accounts. That's what they're calling it, which I don't know how I feel about that. And it's about other people taking control over things. So if we go a little bit further, because like I said, this is the dismantling period, and it's also going to be a little bit more extreme because it is the halfway point since the seated eclipses that we had in Scorpio. If we go back and we look at that eclipse, which is, I mean, both of them, the Taurus and the Scorpio eclipse, it was a lot, but I'm really focusing on the Scorpio eclipse because that's what we seated, right? So here we have a Sun, Moon, Venus solar eclipse. Mars at the time was in a square to Neptune, so we didn't entirely know where we were going, or there was some sense of perhaps not giving the full story about where we're going with money that's being spent, like towards war, towards taxes, what have you. And even though the lunar eclipse in Taurus is done, you still have the sun coming into these same degrees, which is squaring it, and it's going to light all this stuff up again like a Christmas tree. So I think a lot of people are going to be surprised when they do their taxes. I think they're going to realize that there wasn't as much give back, and that inevitably that money that we got from stimulus, it doesn't just come from the ethers, right? Eventually you're gonna have to pay the piper. All right, so now we look at, once we get out of this sequence, right? Once we get out of the squares, which I think is probably going to take until about mid-February, as we see the moon oppose Uranus and square here again. We will see the Mercury-Saturn conjunction, which, you know, you guys hate me for it, but I'm telling you right now, we're going to find out that there is new limitations when it comes to speech. Like, there's no doubt, like there's a war on free speech right now, and about what is considered terrorism, what is considered hate speech, like what is considered okay to be said on the internet. I mean, it's kind of a scary time to be a free thinker, to be honest with you. And that's really hard for probably anybody who's interested in astrology, because that's the beauty of astrology, is being able to study something that's about patterns and knowing that we don't necessarily have control and we have to kind of just let things be. So it concerns me about the ability to speak freely about this, about anything. I mean, those of you guys who watch my stuff, yeah, I do horoscopes and that's great and everything, and I do the moon reports, but what I really love doing has been like political astrology and like talking about that since the days that I was on Lotta's channel. And so I see some of these conjunctions and these squares, and I feel like everybody is going to probably feel like they're waking up from a bad dream in March, realizing that there are certain things that are getting ready to come out in the world that's going to limit literally your ability to connect. And whether that means, you know, power that goes down, or there's new regulations with the internet and you have to have certain credentials to be able to get on the new internet, the new Web3 that's coming out. If you have to have a certain ID, or you have to be registered to be able to go and speak online and speak freely. So the beginning of March is the time to watch with that Mercury-Saturn conjunction. But really what I'm thinking about is what's going to happen when the Sun-Uranus is seated again. Okay, so let's look at that. So this will be when there's a turning point. And this happens in a really, really interesting time. So this will be May of 2023. We see the sun had just finished crossing the North Node right here at 4 degrees. We're in the midst of a Mercury retrograde in Taurus. There will be a Sun Cazimi at 11 degrees of Taurus here, which does seem to suggest there is some kind of information that's getting ready to be relayed in regards to control of banking and resources and food. It happens at an 11, which is very Uranian. It's like sudden and shocking. Is it going to be that, you know, businesses are shifting gears in terms of the types of currency that they're taking in regards to business? Do more people start taking Bitcoin? Is there an incentive for people to go, I'm spending money with cash, I'm buying with cash? Do people decide that they want to invest suddenly, pull money from banks, right? Something like that may happen. A retrograde is about changing direction. And when this happens, we're going to see Venus, which is the ruler of all this stuff in Taurus, coming into a square with Neptune, going, holy cow, I need to change something, or I, need to diversify something, possibly. But the real moment is going to be where the Sun-Uranus seed is planted, which will be at 18 degrees. I'm super excited. It's going to be in opposition to my sun, so I'm like, and this will be the day or so to watch, right around May 8th, 2023. So when this happens, obviously that 18 degrees, which is a hot degree, if you follow degree theory, it is about illness, it is about sickness, it is about accidents, it can be about some rather difficult situations. And the difference between the Sun-Uranus square and the Sun-Uranus conjunction is the square is basically saying we are pushing back against physical change, right? Especially with the Sun and Uranus, it's like groups are basically saying you can't spend money on this, you can't eat that, you will own nothing and be happy. We're going to start putting crickets in your chocolate chip cookies. So in May, when the Sun and Uranus come into conjunction, people are going to go, holy shift, this has physically happened, right? This is what is happening. So we're going to realize that there is some fusion of what is real and physical, whether it's the body, the earth, whatever, and technology, Uranus. Okay, so what else? Oh, I don't know, the Pluto transit. This will be after we come into the Sun square Pluto. I think the Sun square Pluto is the least of our worries, to be honest with you. I'm more curious to look at what's going to happen when Jupiter comes into a square with Pluto. Once again, does something have to happen this day? No. Generally, you want to see lunar transits. So we could go back in time, and you guys might start actually see this pop up right around the eclipse. That's going to be in Scorpio. Oh, that's fun. So it looks like that's going to be right around, 15 degrees. So, and we know eclipses play out a couple weeks before to a couple weeks after. So watch this eclipse May 5th. We've got a Scorpio lunar eclipse, which is not an easy eclipse with the moon being in Scorpio. Mars starting to at least come into a trine with Neptune, but I'm still not wild about a debilitated Mars in Cancer. Okay, so you may start to feel it right around the 5th. Yes, the actual conjunction won't take place until about 18 degrees. It looks like that's going to be happening closer to May 8th, May 9th. The exact conjunction is going to be on the 9th if you want to split hairs. And it looks like right when it's going to be 1856. Is that correct? Yeah. So 18 degrees and 56 solar arc minutes. So it looks like it's going to be happening around the 3 o'clock hour. I'm on Central Time, so Central Time, 4 p.m. Eastern, and that will be right around 1 p.m. on the West Coast. So May 9th. And what's going to be interesting on this day is that we've got the moon in Capricorn coming into the trine. So the moment that it happens, the moon is trining this out, okay? Moon in Capricorn, putting an emphasis on Saturn. Here we have Saturn that's now in Pisces, right? And we've also starting to see Saturn come into a sextile with the North Node and the sextile with Mercury retrograde. It's going to be land limitations. Might be land grabs. I think we'll see more of that with Jupiter coming into a square with Pluto, but I think this might be bank runs. I also think that this might be like food rationings, like limitations with food and supplies. I don't like saying that, but it is possible. And we're going to see the moon then come into conjunction with Pluto in Aquarius. And then we're going to see Jupiter come into a square with Pluto. So Jupiter then moves into Taurus. Now Jupiter's going to stay in Taurus for the rest of the year. So once it moves into Taurus, it's there. We've got like a total cow party here, right? Sun, Uranus, Mercury, North Node, Jupiter. And Jupiter's kind of leading the pack. So as we see that moon come into Taurus around mid-May, right here, right when the moon enters into Taurus, May 17th. Moon Jupiter is great. Moon Jupiter North Node is sweet. The square to Pluto. So it's literally how the physical world, the financial world, the earth, and anything that rules Taurus is adjusting to now Pluto and Aquarius. So it's like, how do chefs now respond to the fact that they may not be as needed? I'm not saying that. Obviously, I would much rather have somebody cook a meal than have it, like come off of like some radioactive microwave kitchen. But this is the kind of stuff that you see, right? People who are artists, people who are jewelers, people who are farmers, how they are responding and reacting to technology, right? We've got Pluto and Aquarius now. It is the opening square. So to Pluto, at least. So this is where everything is being seated with Uranus, but it's the opening square to Pluto. So it's saying like how physical changes respond to this new shift in power, right? So are you going to see that suddenly and dramatically overnight the banks change? Yeah, I do think some people might wake up and find out like everything's fine, everything's been like converted, or there's this incentive, we're going to this new system, cash in your physical dollars for digital dollars. I think they will probably do that. But I also think that this is going to be about whether we are giving way to extreme power or greed or potential manipulation, right? Like, I look at this and I go, how are artists going to respond to the fact that it's going to be much more challenging when it comes to your craft if you just have a machine that's generating art now? Or if you are a content creator and now potentially we're just going to have like, artificial, people or like YouTubers who are going to start creating content. Now we're going to start having like digital people talking on a screen and it's not even a real person. Maybe some of you guys have seen some of those creepy photos that have been kind of going around. It looks like they took almost like Polaroids or something at a party. And it's like a bunch of what looks like humans. They're all completely AI generated people. Like, it's just like super freaky. So this is kind of the turning point where we're going to start to see some of these physical changes and how it's going to affect physical people, resources, the earth, and also systems. Now, the Pluto square Jupiter in itself, it's also going to be really magnifying the Sun-Uranus conjunction, right? Because Aquarius is connected to Uranus, and we're seeing that the sun is still hovering around there. We'll be coming into what is going to be a new moon. It won't be a solar eclipse until we get to 29 degrees of Aries, so it'll be a little bit later. But I'm really looking at mid-March, basically. Long story short, mid-March is when we're going to see some of these physical changes. So you're going to start hearing over the next couple of weeks, well, this is the direction that we're going in. And for the life of me, I keep asking myself, like, is this the reason why we had the pandemic? Did we have the pandemic because it was years of keeping people kind of hidden behind the scenes, not knowing what was going on, while they continued to push technology, while they continued to kind of wreck the financial system, while they started planning setting up CBDCs, knowing that they would bring economies on the brink of collapse and then scare them with war and lack of resources, so people would just accept this new system that's coming? Are we going to be required to sign up for this to be able to have access to the internet? These are all questions that you should be asking yourself, because as crazy as I'm sure I sound, a lot of people are going to be in for a rather rude awakening that's going to have a dramatic overnight effect on their resources come springtime. Even though this sounds doom or gloom, looking into the future, like I said, this could also be an opportunity, okay? Where some of you guys may find, as a result of what you're listening to and what you're hearing, what may be limited, it helps guide you and prepare and make better decisions, because you may come out on top with like Jupiter going into Taurus. Jupiter North Node is wealth. It may make some people overnight extremely wealthy, but I don't think that necessarily means money. I wonder if this is going to be a run on physical, tangible materials. Like, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm going to have to tell you guys that. But in the back of my mind, I've been like, oh, Venus, okay, Taurus, copper, land, seeds, anything to do with gardening, hydroponics, because we're going to see that Uranus is going to start sextiling Neptune. I think that there can be some people who start to see the writing on the wall and go, I'm going to initiate a grow up with my community so we have food, or we're going to start exchanging things. Or, you know, maybe you start getting more interested in, you know, saving or storing seeds, right? That, I know that sounds crazy, very prepper-like, but that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting with this. In the background, we're also going to see that Saturn is sextiling Jupiter, and Saturn will start growing into a sextile with Uranus, which means we're going to see some behind-the-scenes control and limitation in terms of how wild the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction can get in 2024. Ask any wellness person, anybody who's into like homeopathic stuff, or even like Ayurveda, or just natural herbal remedies, right? There is a push right now with the FDA to start limiting what supplements you can buy. I don't know if you guys know that. And determining like what is and is not legal. And so I look at this and I go, wow, what a great time to start learning like how to grow certain plants or your own food or herbs now, right? Just so maybe you're potentially kind of prepared for that. Down the road, and this will be going into this next year, as we start to see these squares play out, they will be very loud this year. We are going to see the opening square to that 18 degrees take place with a Venus retrograde. So right around the time that the Sun and Venus are conjuncting. So it looks like that conjunction is actually going to happen at about 19 degrees-ish, 20. Still within a square. So this will be the opening to whatever is being seeded will happen with a Sun-Venus conjunction, which is sweet, that cazimi, in a square to Uranus this summer in August. So how individuals are changing and adapting, how creatives are changing and adapting, how self-employed are changing and adapting, performers. I'm curious what's going to happen here, like what's going to happen to the art of performing or creating now that we may not need, studios may not need actors. That's a really scary thing to think about, right? Especially in the sign of Leo. And some of the implications that this is going to have on a few different creative industries, but I'm really wondering how it's going to be affecting the self-employed. That's just something that's really making me kind of wonder. Now, down the road, obviously, we're going to see Jupiter hang out in Taurus. It's only going to make it to, I think, about 15 degrees, and then it'll retrograde. Yeah. So it'll come close to that degree. It won't stay there. Then we're going to see Jupiter retrograde. We're going to see Uranus retrograde. And when Uranus retrogrades, it'll retrograde back round about that 18 degrees. Looks like it's going to station at 19. That'll be beginning of 2024. But when we come into the next 3/4 square, okay, this will be in 2024. We're going to see right here, February 9th, 2024, new moon in Aquarius. Looks like it's going to be at 20 degrees. Square Uranus. Okay, still the North Node Mars-Uranus conjunction we had this last summer. Innovations in technology and resources in food and banking. And right after that happens, I want to say weeks later, it might be a few months, the highly anticipated Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Right here. So Jupiter will hit that 18 degrees again. It sits at 21. What does it mean, 21? It's going to be, it's going to be global. We're going to see that there is going to be this push to have like more of like a global traded currency, a digital currency. Perhaps there's going to be innovations in farming and education. And also possibly we're going to see that there's going to be new opportunities for education. But I think that this is going to be financial literacy, like that being a thing. Like we need to focus on teaching that in school. It's a really important topic. But just in the back of my mind, knowing that all of this is so strongly tied to all these planets in Pisces. It's like, yeah, by the time we get to 2024, there's most likely a new financial system that's in place. Whether we're seeing this happen in April or when Mars is showing up, it's well on its way, guys. So, you know, it's not just the full moon. I guess that's really what I'm trying to get at. It's not just the full moon that is bringing this about. Really what's bringing this about in the skies is the Sun-Uranus square. And the question is when you start to kind of feel like you're getting your back up against a wall over this next week and you're resisting making physical changes, or you're being told that you need to kind of scale back on something or let go of something or make sacrifices for other people, this is not me saying it's a me first attitude. Okay, I think you guys know that's not really like my MO. It's where you're being told to make sacrifices and get in line, and ultimately it's going to limit your happiness. It's going to limit also your ability to be creative and experience joy. So combating this is really like asking yourself, what can I do to get grounded? What can I do to focus being here right now? How can I create more? How can I focus on being able to share my talents with the world? Because the more people are willing to do that, the more that we're going to be able to have solutions for some of the stuff that's going on. You don't want to be waking up over the spring, you know, in the midst of Taurus season with your pants down being like, oh, well, I didn't know that this was coming, or I didn't know that I wasn't going to be able to use physical dollars. I didn't know that I needed to save money. I needed to save food. I didn't know that I was going to have to pay to be able to have access to electricity. I mean, we do, but there's going to be surging costs for food and also for energy. That's part of the Sun-Uranus conjunction. With the North Node being there and Jupiter going there, we need to be looking at solutions for the future when it comes to energy in a global manner, right? And diffusing some of this energy with Pluto square the nodes, where we just have a tendency just to want to burn something down, right? I took all 12 signs through this transit in my horoscopes. It's the very first transit that I have for the horoscopes. So if you guys want, I'll link that at the end of this video so you can go and check that out. There's time codes so you can go directly to your sign. I'm not going to talk about how it's going to play out for you specifically in this video. And just keep in mind that during the Sun square Uranus transit, like, you know, generally people don't have a hard time standing their ground and confronting people. And so it's not about being confrontational. I'm not inciting that. It's about confronting the powers at large. I think that's part of what this is about. Let me go back so I can see this square. There we go. I think it's also about with the Sun square Uranus, like doing what might seem impossible. And like the truth is that we aren't going to be able to do a lot on an individual level. Like we're going to need the support of other people. And so, yeah, there can be disturbances, there can be shakeups, like we can feel like things are totally like out of order. We may feel more stressed than usual. That's part of what comes up with squares to Uranus. But the key is to stay open-minded and also be more flexible, right? If you're super nervous and acting out and being erratic during this transit, you're going to lose sight of the opportunity through the stress to realize that something has to change. So if you find yourself needing to make changes, make changes. Don't do it too quickly, okay? There can be a sense of acting too quickly. And try to stay grounded in the midst of the chaos. That's my advice for you. I want to read to you guys the Sabian symbols for that 15 degrees because it's going to be exact. And I just got done doing the video for the full moon in Leo, and I got to read you guys the Sabian symbols, I think for 17, but I would like to read 15 for the Sun in Aquarius, and I'd like to read 15 for Taurus, so we can take a look at that, because they're going to be somehow related, okay? Sabian Symbols book, those of you guys who have it. So let's take a look first at 15 degrees of Taurus. And remember, the Sun is the faster moving planet, so it's applying pressure to Uranus, and it's got a little bit more oomph to it. So this is why I think that we're definitely going to see some action here. Okay, so yeah, we'll start with 15 degrees of Taurus. And it is 15 on the nose. It's one of those rare times that we can read that Sabian symbol. Here we go. Taurus 15, a man muffed up with a rakish silk hat. The keyword is sophistication. The theme is nonchalant, The symbol speaks to the ability to maintain poise even in the most trying situations. The image of a man muffled with a silk hat portrays a dramatic effort to radiate dignity and personal distinction. The implication here is a strong sense of self and refusal to settle for just being another face in the crowd. This degree also suggests a sophisticated ability to use whatever resources lie at hand to achieve a goal or overcome obstacles. At its highest, the symbol represents self-composure and resourcefulness in meeting the challenges of everyday life. Watch for arrogance and refusal to take life seriously. The accent is on role play, impressions, or the appearance of things. The recommendation is to put your best foot forward. Individuals and groups are not likely to let others dictate what is or is not appropriate. Your greatest advantage lies as acting as if. Create yourself anew by visualizing yourself as you would be and dramatize the self to that world. Maintain your dignity no matter what difficulties you face. Guard against being overconfident or cocky. Avoid making promises you can't keep or creating expectations you can't live up to. I didn't read this before I did the lecture because I wanted to wait until we read it. So it's kind of coming back to me. I think it's interesting that it talks about putting your best foot forward. And so I think that once again, speaking on, people trying to kind of work together, but people wanting to feel heard, not wanting to be another face in the crowd, trying to overcome obstacles. Yeah, it kind of makes sense, Use whatever resources at hand to overcome obstacles. Dramatic effort to radiate on self, refusal to settle for just another face in the crowd. So I think that you're going to see individuals rise up. I mean, I said that during the full moon in Leo with that moon square. But the sun, like I said, it's in a more superior position. So let's see what the sun says for Aquarius at 15. Okay, Aquarius 15 degrees. Two lovebirds sitting on a fence. The keyword is affirmation. The magic of romance. Oh, I remember this one. The symbol speaks to the infectious nature of romance, to the magic it brings in not only lovers, but to those who at any moment of sharing have lifted in beauty above the practical routine of everyday life. Here, the lightness of heart and brightness of spirit is that result when a thoughtful added touch transforms an ordinary moment or special occasion. The image of two lovebirds sitting on a fence speaks to love, happiness, and one. At its highest, it represents psychological wholeness, self-integration, stimulates others to see themselves in their fellows in terms of their similarities and common needs rather than differences. Watch for possessiveness, a tendency to transform symbolic or codependent relationships with others, to form. The accent is on romance. It should be a time of contentment and fulfillment. You may hear of marriage or engagement between two people trying to make up their minds about whether they commit or they go their separate ways. Your greatest advantage lies in forming alliances and coming to agreement on a decision of some important matter. Now is a good time to reach out and heal a strained relationship. Guard against being overly protective or possessive. Happiness, self-fulfillment, contentment, relationship, cooperation, loyalty. Very interesting. It's almost as if through the division, there is unity. If this is the degree that's going to trump what's going on with the Leo full moon and also with Uranus, which is talking about like, hey, I don't want to just be another face in the crowd. If you get enough people who feel like they've been cast aside, or enough people who feel like they are also kind of outcasts, or they kind of have the same opinions, or also perhaps feel like they have been separated from society in some way, like that can be unifying in some sense, right? So I think that what a lot of us are going to realize is that it's going to make more sense to work together, even if we don't have the same perspectives, even if we don't have the same beliefs. We can be different. We can come from different backgrounds, different belief systems, different social and economic classes. But if we're all feeling the same oppression, if we're all feeling the same limitation, if we all feel like we're not being heard, rather than fighting and having conflict and pushing back against each other, it's an important time to realize that it doesn't matter how different we are. If we're all kind of the minority at this point, we're not going to make change unless we unify. So I love the lovebirds because it does talk about two people who are coming together, who are committed and they're willing, and they finally make a decision to work together. You may see some really interesting opposing forces team up with this square. So you may see people who decided to kind of buck the system and leave major companies or financial institutions and go, I'm fighting against this. You may also see some very unlikely duos that form as a result of situations that push them to coming together, right? So people who have been odds, or people who have had long-standing rifts, or potentially even rivals, right? We may see that they're brought together in some sense. So man, that makes me feel a little bit better with some of the transits that are going on. And it really does, in so many ways, really highlight what's coming when Venus moves into its home sign of Taurus. What's going to happen when Venus is on the North Node and Venus is conjunct Uranus? And we realize that the key is loving each other, supporting each other, feeding each other, rising each other, lifting each other up, and really focusing on raising vibrations. Like that seems to be like the big thing when I look at some of these transits. Many of you guys aren't going to realize this for a little while, so you're getting so caught up in the headlines of war and politics and, you know, all of that theater that's being created right now to cause more conflict and more disruption. If you look beyond that and you realize that there are other people who equally feel left out, you want to befriend those people. You want to support some of those people, you know. And it kind of reminds me, like, in the words of Joe Dirt, like, is this where you want to be when Jesus comes back? I mean, not really a religious person, but it's kind of what it reminds me of. It's like, you know, when you think about that, I'm going to say archetype. A lot of people will argue that he was a real person. I'm sure he was. He made friends with beggars. He made friends with outcasts in society. He had followers that were prostitutes. I mean, right? So maybe this is going to be like a unification of like all of the rebels and the oddballs that come together and end up kind of creating this force for love and support. And maybe that's what's going to save humanity. I don't know. That I can only hope. Hopefully that was inspiring and you guys are able to make sense of all of my crazy ranting and rambling today. Look back at those transits, like I said, that have been going on over the last few years, specifically what's been happening since last spring. I myself can think about some of the crazy things that were happening around the eclipses last year and how it's like really kind of unfolded. So I'm curious to see what manifests from this as well. Send me good vibes. It's all in a square to my Pluto and my Sun. But maybe that's part of why I've started giving some of the discussions that I've been giving and also contemplating how else I can be kind of contributing to what's going on in the world in another platform. So we'll see how that plays out. Let me know, leave me your comments below. Make sure you're giving me a thumbs up and subscribe if you have not already subscribed to my channel. We have videos coming out every couple days. You guys are watching this on Thursday, so you're coming into that full moon energy. If you haven't seen that video already, check that out. I did it a little backwards. Most people just want to know what's going on with the full moon. They don't always want all of this stuff, so I got to put that out first. We will be doing live readings tomorrow. Check me out on the channel. It's a good time for a reading. They're going to be donation-based, so they're affordable, so everybody who wants one can get one. A link will be posted on my community tab if you want to get in the queue and reserve your time, because likely they're several hours long. We'll be reading astrology and doing full moon readings, actually, so that they can be quite colorful right around the time of the full moon. Other than that, I'll see you guys on Sunday, and we will continue to kind of work through some of this wild astrology as it plays out in the cosmos. All right. Until next time, I'll see all of you guys very soon. Take care.